Welcome to Reddit Stories, and for the first time, we will be tackling one of the top posts from AskReddit. So, this one would be from a question posted by a deleted username. Yes, that's how it goes here. And not sure if you're familiar with this proverb, but I'll read it just the same. Shout out to the background noise. I'd like to apologize for that. Anyway, so here is the proverb: a child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel the warmth. What time in your life have you been closest to starting the fire? This was a thread or a question posted 9 months ago, and it was already archived since it had a lot of upvotes and also had a lot of replies to this question. So let's go and start. First by Sungri423. K-pop fans out there, this name might be familiar to you, but it's just a username. So let's start. I had a coworker at a non-commission based retail job where a coworker would repeatedly sabotage my sales so she could get a lot of credit apps and a high GSP or average hourly sales. She would overhear my pitch for cards required, then lie to the customer so they would apply. I would have to try and rectify what she said while she hovered over me. She did many other questionable things, and I reported her multiple times, as did my coworkers and customers. Now, one time I got lucky, and an 18-year-old kid came in to buy the most expensive desktop we have on display, 2.5K. She saw me do this sale, but I needed the manager to approve a tiny discount, but my radio was dead. Coworker was watching me the entire time, so I asked if she'd call for the manager. She stone cold ignores me. I go for the manager. She prints out paperwork on the computer and tries to sell it to him. When I return, she literally yells at me in front of the customer to give her the sale because she worked too. I ignored her and didn't give her the sale. When I reported this, as this the customer, he was mortified. I was literally told by my boss, ignore when she does that. She's a middle child, so she does stuff like that. I was tired of the stupid lack of action, so I filed an HR complaint regarding her and five of my managers for not addressing it. They all got reamed for it. Only one is still in a management position. The rest were eventually demoted or laid off. Um, I may not be a middle child. I'm a firstborn actually, but that's really not a fair assessment or not a good way to forgive her misgivings because not all middle child people who grow up into working adults or at least adults that enter the workforce are not like that. They don't have childish tendencies like that. So, yeah, any middle child out there, you may post your comments and violent reactions. Moving on to the next story, and just a little heads up, some of these stories are getting darker and darker, and you'd understand why. The African proverb is very appropriate, except that, well, they decided not to push through with it, and what could possibly be. Yeah, that's a minor spoiler for most of the stories forward. So, story by Random K300. For some reason or another, my mother hated me. As a little girl, I could never understand why she treated me so much worse than my three other siblings. And I would often go up to my grandmother and ask her, why doesn't my mama love me? She never could give me a straight answer and would tell me, your mama loves you in the only way she knows how. That answer confused me because she loved my siblings just fine. Disclaimer, her love was toxic AF and she did a different type of damage to my other siblings. Now, when I say that my mother treated me badly, it started out with her picking fights with me. She would constantly nitpick at everything I did, chastising me, and at the end of the day, punishing me harshly for something that could have been a gentle scolding. When I got older, she started cussing at me and calling me names. She would often ignore me for days on end, and when she would talk to me, it would be to make me the butt end of a bad joke or to tell me she hated me. Yes, my mother looked me dead in the eyes and told me she hated me. Disclaimer number two, she was a drug addict and alcoholic, and she loves to claim all the emotional abuse she put me through as a child was because the effects of the drugs. And it wasn't even that bad. It was things like that that really began to tear at me after a while. All sorts of terrible things she did to me growing up, the terrible things she said, and how she ignored me constantly, all of it very different than how she treated my other three siblings. She was very close with one of my brothers and my sister. She would spend time with them constantly, take them anywhere, buy them anything that they wanted, and it made me resent them. My sister would sometimes rub it in my face that mom loved her more. It was her way of having power over me, and it was one of the things that made my rage bubble over on innocent people. I just wanted to be loved and accepted. I wanted to be cared for and cherished as a child should be. And when I didn't get that, I plotted on how I was going to get her love and affection. In my screwed up mind, I thought that if I got rid of my older brother and younger sister, I would be one of the only people left for her to love. I planned on killing my brother. How screwed up is that? It wasn't just some thought that passed through my head. It was a constant idea, a plan that I was putting into place to end his life so that I could make room for my mother's heart for me. I feel ashamed writing it out. It was a dark time in my life, and I was also incredibly mentally ill. My brother was addicted to pain medications, and my parents were trying desperately to get him clean at that time. Ironically, at the same time he was going on a drug induced rampage, my sister had shattered her leg on a trampoline. She was on some pretty heavy pain pills, and while mother was doing everything in her power to keep my brother away from the drugs, she would leave my sister and her drugs in my care. So one day, while my mother was out dealing with my brother and my sister was sleeping, I took the rest of her pills. My sister was super afraid of becoming addicted to drugs after watching what my mother and brother were going through, so there was a ton left, and I waited for my brother to come back. When I heard him come through his window, his room was next to mine. I went into the kitchen and made him a glass of juice. Earlier in the day, I had crushed up some pills into a powder and I mixed them into the juice. I went up to his room, knocked on the door, and offered him the cocktail of various prescription drugs. He took the juice, and right before he was about to drink it, I had thought, how could I do this to my own brother? I snatched the drink back, and it spilled all over the carpet. He was high and super pissed, but at least he was alive. I never tried anything like that again. It felt so sick, wrong, evil. I mean, what type of person thinks about killing their brother? Besides, my brother dying would not make my mother love me anymore. She would have just resented me for living instead of him. So that's the sad, sick story of how I almost executed my brother. I didn't actually carry through it, and I guess everyone lived happily ever after. My brother got clean, and now it's a family. I'm in college. My sister's leg healed up nicely, and my mom left us after a while, but that's a story for another time. Well, yeah, sometimes when you have a vengeance plan in mind, and by the time that you are about to do it, you snap a little into your consciousness and ask yourself, are you willing to do this? And how can you do this? Next story is by Actol Gacy. He says, I have two sisters, one older and one younger. My mom worked hard to make sure each of us felt special and loved. My dad, not so much. He called my older sister Princess, and my little sister was referred to as Little Buddy. For whatever reason, I got kind of forgotten about. I didn't mind most of the time. I found my dad annoying, demanding, and at times unreasonable. I hated the way he bullied my mom and would lash out about things that didn't make sense. Basically, I thought of my dad as a total brat. He'd have a bad day at work and would find someone to take it out on, usually my mom and I. But I still tried. I tried to cuddle up with him, feeling hurt when he'd shrug me off and tell me I need to shower. I made gifts for him, got good grades, won poetry contests, won awards through Bible quiz, never argued, but it never seemed to work. Before long, he'd find something to yell at me about, things that usually didn't make sense. If my little sister and I fought, the whole thing was my fault. My feet turned in. I hated when my dad would come to my sporting events because seeing me run with inturned feet seemed to be humiliating for him. One time I was running from one base to another, feeling exhilaration because I'd done it. I'd hit a home run. The smile died in my face when I heard my dad yell, "Run with your feet straight, you look stupid." As a teen, my mom really stepped up and started insisting that he was going to leave me alone. He was never physically abusive, but the way he talked to you made you feel like he was trying to say something that would break you. When I was 15, he was almost successful. I went through a couple of really bad months. My friend died, my dog died, we moved, and my mental health was tanking. A week after my friend died, car accident, my dad asked, "So when are you going to get over it?" It took me by surprise because at that time I wasn't crying or acting out. I was just sitting there, eating dinner with the family. My mom immediately reacted, gasping out the surprise, "John!" And the two of them began fighting again over my dad's need to mess with me. I sat there, head down on the table, thinking, I'm not allowed to be sad. I'm not allowed to feel happy. I can't get mad. I'm in pain, and he finds it annoying. Just leave me alone, Dad. Leave me alone. That's when it clicked. My dad, for whatever reason, seemed to hate me. I could try to make him like me, but it wasn't going to work. As I got older, my goal became to avoid him. His seemed to be to forge a relationship with me with the sole purpose of having a target for his need to bully. We were never going to have a healthy father daughter relationship. That's when it clicked. It's not me, it's him. My sisters could like and love him, but I didn't need to respect him. I was done trying to please him, trying to do the right things, trying to be the daughter that my dad seemed to want. Fast forward almost 10 years later, after the birth of my son, my dad had tried to begin a new relationship with me because, for whatever reason, he latched on to my kid. For the sake of my kid, I let my dad have a relationship with him, but I was always monitoring, waiting for my son to develop a personality that would change the way my dad saw him. There was no way I was going to let my dad do to my son what he did to me. Fortunately, my dad died before the change could happen. I sat in the back at his funeral, dry eyed and satisfied. Of course, my sisters were upset. They had good relationships, but for me and my mom, it kind of felt like the Wicked Witch was at long last dead. No more stress, no more unreasonable expectations. The eggshells we'd been walking on were swept away, and we could be content. I had I have an uncle in West Virginia that I started to see as my father figure. At first, I would jokingly call him Dad, testing the waters, waiting for him to remind me that he actually has kids and doesn't need an adopted daughter. I go see him once a year, but I always felt like maybe he sees my need to see him as a dad to be annoying. A couple of weeks ago, I asked him if he was coming up for Christmas. He said he couldn't, but then he said, "I love you, my daughter. Sorry this was so long. I guess I needed to get that out." Well, that was a happy ending. The storyteller held on to her anger and actually found a person who's willing to be a father figure and be called dad because he ended up calling her daughter. Next story is by Adhesive Spinach. I didn't grow up with the best family. There was a long period of time where there was constant fighting, and things often went too far. I didn't feel safe in many different ways. It all culminated to a point when I was 17, disowned, and about to get kicked out. But my vindictive, defensive actions in the past made my mother know that kicking me out wasn't a good idea. I know the only reason I could have a roof over my head was because my mom isn't a citizen, and she knew I would have reported her for the crime of child abuse, which did happen, which would have put her residency in jeopardy. So I guess I had to threaten to burn the village in order to feel the warmth of safety. Edit. A lot of people are assuming my mother is illegal, but she's not. I'm not exactly sure the mechanism through which she can stay in the United States, but she married my dad, an American, and they got divorced. She can live and work here, but she doesn't have the full protection of the government like me. I don't know about you, but that narrator sounds like an anchor baby that her mother needed to stay in the United States. Because she's not illegal, she's not an illegal immigrant, but she used to be married to an American, and then she ended up having a kid with that American. So yeah, maybe there's still a lot of things I don't know about that part of American law. I might research a little bit more on that later on. Moving on. Next narrator is Anon 22514. So here, there's a good reason why he chose a throwaway account for this. I haven't been as close as many people have, but in terms of starting the fire, well, I almost did it literally. It's been a number of years and I've been trying to forget over the years, so details may be vague and lost in maybe a half dozen other similar plots, all targeting that same school. Also, I really do not want to relive my emotions from this time, so most of the terrible crap I suffered won't be mentioned. This is the story of the only time I truly wanted to set a school on fire and almost did. Even though I was born into a loving family, well, given the time and standards of Asian parents, I was bullied in school rather harshly. Mostly false accusations to the point where my family started to believe that I was the problem, and my parents started beating me for being the problem. I tried to be the model student and not lower myself to their level. Did not work. Every single person in that school at that point had bullied me directly. All 400 people from kindergarten to grade 6, be it throwing rocks at me because someone else said to nearly stripping me naked in public by ganging up on me and restraining me. The teachers did nothing to stop them and punished me for retaliating against my bullies. I was the problem according to them. Eventually, the bullying went on for so long and got so bad that I had made plans to bomb the school after probably falling into possible depression. My family had a massive stigma on mental health, so sorry, no therapist, also a few problems from culture differences. I knew enough about chemistry and ventilation systems to make what is known as a fuel air explosive device, since I was always fascinated with spaceflight, rocket engines, and by extension, life support. I would read my dad's engineering documents instead of picture books. I knew all sorts of random facts about science and engineering, so I knew the natural gas contained a small amount of sulfur in it. Pinning down the exact timing and releasing of the bomb was the real problem. I spent months researching fluid flows and ventilation systems, half of which I didn't understand, but it seemed that a wait time of around 4 hours would get enough gas to pool in the ceiling area for potential ignition. Eventually, the plan consisted of getting into the mechanical room and letting the antiquated vent system do its thing. The first part would be to trigger a natural gas leak into the ventilation system. The lock on the mechanical room was faulty and never got replicated. It would be easy to send gas into the vent system since the gas hose was right beside the intake fan. Terrible design. By loosening the joint a bit with a wrench, the leak could be made. I had a wrench that I would play with, borrowed from my dad, so I could easily get it into school. After all I had to do was light a match, during one of my classes or wait for the admittedly old wiring to short, and I would turn the school into a fireball. A week after my plan was set, the class went for a field trip into the mechanical room. I brought my wrench with me in a fanny pack, intending to sneak it off and unseal the gas pipe. This meant all the forms had to be filled out in a few days in advance so I had time. I also bought a knife in case the wrench didn't work. If that failed, I would use a hacksaw blade. All I needed was for the gas to start leaking out. So the gas goes into the mechanical room. I stop at the back of the class for a moment, follow a bit, but trail just a bit behind and hide. I had found the main ventilation fan. The natural gas line was right beside the intake. No one was around. I reached into my kit and touched my instruments of potential destruction. And then I asked myself if I really wanted to die that way. Would I have lived a life that I could be proud of? If I had bombed the school, would my parents approve of it? Would I be that willing to die just for some revenge? In the end, I didn't go through it. I decided that living up to my greatest potential was the best revenge. My tools never left their sheath. When the janitor found me staring at the burners, I merely said, "They sound like rocket engines." I almost did it. I almost turned my school into a giant fireball. I was not embraced by that village, and I very nearly burned it down to feel its warmth. I never went through with this plan or any of my other murder plans, such as my plan to bomb a church, where I was also bullied terribly, or have my sibling die in a motor vehicle accident because he joined my bullies and sent them my nudes, or the several other times I wanted to enact this plan or similar plans. My mother got involved in the bullying case, and the whole incident nearly ended in a lawsuit, several people having to step down from their positions, and my mother becoming feared in the city education system as a woman who near single handedly handed the director of the education board his own ass on a silver plate. I switched schools and now I'm here. If my parents hated me as much as they did most people in this thread, I'm fairly certain I would have ended up a textbook example of why you don't bully the weird kid that's obsessed with science. Knowing what I know now, the plan that 8-year-old me had devised wouldn't have worked to make a giant bomb, but it would definitely have caused suffocation and a potential building collapse. I didn't start out as vengeful. I don't think anyone does. Yeah, sometimes you're just angry and then you snap back into consciousness thinking about, yeah, what if I really pushed through with this? Is this the hill I'm willing to die on? Obviously, in his case, it's not the kind of hill he wanted to die on. So, not surprising if he did not push through with that. So, how about you, dear watcher, dear listener, or anyone that stumbled upon this humble video of mine? What almost pushed you to burn the village? Was it literal? Was it figurative? Just post here in the comments. You don't need to use your actual account. You can always use a throwaway account the same way that these storytellers did. So hopefully I'll be seeing you on the next video. Thank you, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell for notifications to be alerted of the next uploads. See you on the next video. Bye bye.